my colleague, Dr. who's the director of the BU Center for the Study of Asia, to say a few words of welcome to everyone. I know he'll stay around as long as he can, but he has teaching responsibilities today, so he'll be in and out. But Bob.
Thank you very much. My role as director of the Center for the Study of Asia is really to say thanks. And that's not merely a formality, not least of all in an event like this that deals with Taiwan and is sponsored by the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Organization. And TICO, as it is known, has been one of our greatest supporters and best friends for the study of Taiwan and the study of China, East Asia, and Asia here at Boston University. And again, I want to single out the director, Cynthia Huang here, who's in the front row. I want to thank you for your generous support. And it's not just support, it's vision, it's input, it's dialogue. And again, I thank you verbally for that. And Bob Morochek, I think Bob's here. Bob has worked long and hard with TICO, done a lot of the heavy lifting over the years. And I want to thank Bob for everything that you have done as well. I am going to limit my remarks just to those expressions of thanks, and my thanks to all of you who took time at what I know is a very busy time of the semester to come to this important event. As Rob said, this is my teaching day. It's actually my heaviest teaching day. So I will be very much in and out. But again, thank you all for attending. So without further ado, other than to say, Rob, did you mention this? This event is being videotaped. So I hope everybody is good with that. If you're not good with that, I don't know what to say. But,
Tell me.
Okay. So thank you again for coming, and thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, TICO, for all of your support. Thank you, Bob, for your critical role also at the center. Thank you again.
So next, Cynthia Huang from the TICO office that Bob just mentioned, to whom we're all grateful. Not just TICO as an institution or the Ministry of Education in Taiwan, but to you personally who've been so supportive of us for so long. So Cynthia, if you'd come up and say a few words.
Okay, good morning, distinguished scholars, faculty, students, and friends. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here at Boston University for today's event. I'm Cynthia Huang, Director of the Education Division at Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Boston, representing the Ministry of Education in Taiwan. And today marks another meaningful milestone in the long and fruitful collaboration between Taiwan and Boston University, especially through the Patti School of Global Studies and the Center for Study of Asia. These partnerships began in 2007, and over the past 18 years, it's in its fourth cycle from 2023 to 2028. Over these years, that Taiwan has worked closely with Boston University to develop this Taiwan study program, and it has grown into a vibrant exchange of ideas, knowledge, and cultural understanding. This partnership is about building the bridge to connect people, ideas, and across the borders by supporting the research, teaching, and public dialogue in a global community. Scholars and students can engage with topics ranging from Taiwan indigenous heritages to its modern geopolitical significance between the past and the future. Today's event is a perfect example. The speakers such as Dr. Lin-Chi Chang, Professor Scott Simon, Professor Catherine Tsai, and Dr. Diana George, they are experts from different areas, history, anthropology and religion, to share insights that resonate far beyond the political areas. I want to thank Professor Robert Hafner, the director of the Director for Center of Study of Asia, and also Professor Robert Weller, our today's moderator for their dedication and commitment to the Taiwan Study Program. And thank you to the CU at the school and also with the Department of Anthropology for co-sponsoring this event and these such incredible topics. And to all you here today, your participation makes today's conference truly meaningful. I'm especially delighted to highlight one of our guest speakers, Dr. Mitchell Chen, who has traveled from Taiwan to join us today. And he's only stayed here for 2 nights and was traveled at the end. And as a director of the National Museum of Taiwan History, Dr. Chang's work bridges the academic research with public engagement. We are so grateful to have shared his perspective representing the multiple history of an island nation. And as we keep peace conference, I encourage you to dive you through the diverse stories and perspectives. Taiwan studies offer the unique multi-layered and timeless narratives, and he likely to see how our shared efforts continue to flourish. Thank you, and I wish you all inspire you and enrich the English better than the fancy. Thanks with.
So we're just going to take a couple of minutes to set things up for today. We have 4 speakers. You've probably seen the program for it. Megan and I were the co-conspirators in coming up with this list. So just in terms of logistics, we may or may not take the coffee break that's on the program. I think if it's possible, we'd like to break for lunch earlier, just to leave a little bit more time. It's really tight the way we have it scheduled right now. But we'll see as things happen. The plan is that after each presentation, we'll leave time for Q&A. So it's not being saved up for the end of the day. If you have questions, go ahead and ask them right away at the end of that particular paper, but hopefully we also have time at the end of the day for a general discussion of everything that's happened as we try to think more broadly about the layers of Taiwan. We called it Layered Taiwan because I suppose every place is a sort of stratigraphy of historical layers, but in Taiwan it feels so obvious and so important that we have all of these different things, from early settlement by various groups of indigenous peoples to Spanish colonialism, Dutch colonialism, waves of Chinese migrants coming over across the Taiwan Strait, various waves of them, Japanese colonialism, KMT rule, democracy. Eventually, we have all of these layers that really play into each other. It's not that one replaced the other, but it's a kind of palimpsest where we continue to see the influence of those older layers even continuing and interacting with the newer layers. So that's what we're hoping to explore over the course of today and over the course of Taiwan's long history. So, Diana, did you want to add anything?
I don't really have anything else to add. I think it's really well said. But just want to say a big thank you for all of you for taking your morning and early afternoon today to come to our conference, especially our friends across the river. I see quite a few friends from Harvard coming. And just please enjoy the talks. And a big thank you to Tico and Thencia, and of course our own Maria and Elena for organizing everything and putting everything together. So I hope you enjoy the conference, and let's talk more during the breaks and lunch.
Walter, let me ask you to come up to the podium. I think he's sort of already been introduced, but he's a historian of Taiwan who graduated from that place across the river And I've known him since he was a graduate student there, actually.
You didn't change it.
I didn't change a bit, he says. That's not true. He's been at the Institute of Taiwan History in the Academia Sinica in Taiwan since its founding, I think, and currently is serving as director of the National Museum of Taiwan History, which I think is at the core of today's talk. I won't tell you the title because you're looking at it. So let me turn this over to you.
Okay. Good morning, 大家好，大家好。I'm Long Chen from Taiwan. It's really a great privilege and pleasure for me to be back to Boston. And as Professor Weller introduced, I was in this area in the early 1990s. And then I returned to Academia Sinica and joined the founding of the new Institute of Taiwan History, which just celebrated its 30th anniversary last year. And 4 years ago, I was invited, fortunately or unfortunately, invited to be the director of the National Museum of Taiwan History in Tainan. So the first thing I would like to stress is that our museum is not National Palace Museum in Taipei, nor is it the National Taiwan Museum in the part and with the which was formerly a Japanese colonial museum called in 1914. And we are also not the National Museum of History, which located in the Botanic Garden in Taipei, which was founded in the 1960s during the then Western country promoting the Chinese culture in the South movement. This museum, the National Museum of Taiwan History, is actually a product of Taiwan's decentralization and indigenization or Taiwanization following the lifting of martial law in 1987. And it was the idea to have a museum featuring Taiwan history was originated in early 1990s when then the Taiwan government, Deng Hui was the government. But it took more than 3 decades before this museum formally opened to the public in 2011. So right now I'm the 5th director of the museum, and what I'm going to present to you is this short history of a national museum in Taiwan, which features Taiwan history and culture. And hopefully in the next maybe 15 or 20 minutes or so, I can give you a rough picture of this museum, and along with some of the recent effort we have been, I and my colleague has been working on. And so my presentation was basically divided into 3 parts. First is an overview of the study of Taiwan history and the founding of the museum. Then I will give you an overview of the function and operation of our museum. And my focus will be on our permanent exhibition and also the renewed version of the permanent exhibition through the museum narrative. I hope you can give you a sense of what we have been talking about since Taiwanese or the history of Taiwan in general. And hopefully I will have time to conclude with some reflections or about the challenge and opportunity we're facing right now. And because of my jet lag and also traveling, my English is maybe a little bit disorganized during the process, so please bear with me. Now, just let me begin with. So this is the picture of our museum. It's located in the northwest suburbs of the historical city of Tainan in southern Taiwan. And it takes like maybe 20 acres of land, and this consists of 2 major buildings. One is the administrative and departmental building, and the other is the exhibition and education building. And we also have a history park surrounding us. That's the general idea. And in the north of the museum is a famous scientific park, Tainan Scientific Park, which TSMC has a lot of factory and personnel located in that area. And we are also surrounded by the newly developed, for example, there is a baseball park just completed and will be open to the public this summer, which baseball is the national sports is in the States. So that's give you a general sense of our location. Our museum is, now we have more than 100 personnel working in different functions and venues. They basically come from two channels. One is the civil servant channel, the other is like educational channels. So I would go into the details about the major functions. So this is a yearly ritual for taking a group photo in different locations of the museum. And this is our newly opened children's corner, which open to the children. So our audience is basically come from two major parts. One is the parent-children section, the other is students. So we are now working very hard to provide a broader service to international audience. So you're most welcome to drop by our museum if you happen to visit Taiwan in the near future. So as most of the museum, we have four major sections. One is the collection sections. After nearly 3 decades of preparation, we now are hosting 150,000 different kinds of items, ranging from written materials to large artifacts. And so let's give you a general sense of that. Okay, and this is the range. Is a wide range of collections. Although we are national museums, but basically we are a museum of social life and featuring everyday life of the Taiwanese people. So that's you can see that from academic stuff to different all walks of the artifacts from all walks of life, and also some artifacts from indigenous peoples. They all become part of our major collections. So we don't have any national treasure as those in the National Palace, but we are more or less a museum for everyone. So every Taiwanese, they can find or get connected with the memories or their memory of their elder generations through the exhibition and artifacts or activities in our museums. We also have a research section. Right now we have like 14 to 16 full-time personnel. And maybe half of them are PhDs from majoring in history and the museology, and also cultural heritage section. So the research section of our museum, in addition to research for the and curating the exhibition, they also work as professional historians on various sources on different time period, ranging from the Dutch colonial period, Qing, Japanese, and Post-war period. And we pride ourselves to be the major institution that have the largest collection of overseas foreign language Taiwan-related materials, all the way from 16th century maps to contemporary artifacts. And we also have a collection of films, documentary films taken in Japanese colonial period and repaired and reopened to the public. And right now we have more than 3,000 different kinds of maps that are related to Taiwan. So that's the publication of sources in collaboration with a friendly institution like the Institute of Taiwan History or the Thailand city government and other institutions. They are all part of our collective efforts. Exhibition is a showcase of our museum to the audience. So we have a permanent exhibition and a permanent exhibition hall located on the second floor of the museum, and this gives you a general sense of the landscape of the permanent exhibition hall. But we also have three special exhibition halls of different sizes. So since we opened to the public in 2011, we have showcased more than 115 different special exhibitions and with all sorts of topics, from environmental issues to like Southeast Asian immigrants, to comics, and to social movements, religion, and also some international collaborative exhibition, for example, the earthquake or with a partner in Japan, etc. So that just gives you a sense that the range of our spatial exhibition. Education is a very significant part of our museum, so we have different kinds of education programs for the audience, ranging from primary school to the college level, and also we also design different kinds of like drama and theater or hands-on workshop for our audience. And our public service section prides itself to be the Institute of Cultural Accessibility. So we pay special attention to like those people with like hearing disabilities, or even elderly or the mentally disabled person. So we have a special workforce to cater into their service and to make the museum accessible to all kinds of different needs. We also have recently we set up a digital innovation service and try to make our resources available through internet and other means. So especially after the COVID pandemic, the long distance service for those who cannot virtually or come to the museum, they can access our resources through internet and other services. So you can access our collections simply by going into this spatial collections webpage, and you can take a quick look of our selection. Also, there's a small 3D model, so you can take a look at the artifact. So if you want to make use of this artifact, you can apply it online for authorization, copyright, and others. So that's one of our most favorite websites. We also have topical website. For example, this is another very important and also very popular website which features the music history or the sound history of Taiwan. And you can actually look at the different authors or songs or titles and listen to the clips online. So that's also another services. So we also have a collection of records and others. So that's another. So to put it together from collection, research, exhibition, and education and public service and digital services, that basically constitute the whole range of our service that this museum provide for our audience and readers. Now let me get into the major narrative of our permanent exhibition. There is a long process of researching, debating, and curating before the museum formally opened to the public in 2011. So although my predecessors, they have a joint, clear consensus about telling the story of the land and the people of Taiwan, but how and what to be told and which artifacts to be used, it's a long process of negotiating. So if you go to our museum, as some of them already did, you can see that it is an open space exhibition. It is not separated by walls or separated by different time period or regimes. So people can choose to go from the prehistory all the way to contemporary, or they can choose to go backwards from contemporary to backwards. Or they can choose to go directly to, for example, you want to know about the Taiwan settlement in Qing period, you can directly go to that section. And we also have a very popular section on Japanese colonial period and all the modern stuff happening over there. So this is a general pictures of the permanent exhibition hall. The planning of the museum started in the late 1990s, and the model for our museum is actually not a national museum or nationalistic museum or patriotism museum. No, we follow the example like Tokyo Edo Museum, which is a social life, museum of social life and folklore. We also follow not the contemporary but the previous Hong Kong History Museum, which also take a similar route, telling the story about the people in everyday life. So this constitutes the main feature of our permanent exhibition when we formally open. So this slide gives you another sense of the permanent exhibition hall. It's spacious and it's open, and just like many of our museum narrative. So we didn't have a standard version of narrative, but we try to tell or to invite the audience to experience firsthand and to think about the things Taiwanese during their tour of the permanent exhibition. In 2019 to 2021, we have a partial renovation of our permanent exhibition after opening for 10 years. There are several new elements being added to this museum narrative, which also reflect development of Taiwan historical study or the museum currents in general. So let me briefly introduce some of the major themes in our partially renovated new permanent exhibition since 2021. One is the idea of Taiwan as a crossroads, or Taiwan as a contact zone of different people, regimes, thoughts, and things. So this idea of encounter has become one of the new elements that has been added to the old narrative, which emphasizes on the subjectivity of the land and the people. But right now, the new narrative is like Taiwan's connection with the world and looking from a macro, transnational, maritime perspective about Taiwan's position in the world. And there's new elements of indigenous people's stories being added to the old narrative of Taiwan's development, which emphasizes the Han settlements, which is no longer the orthodox discourse. Right now, the main discourse of Taiwan is one of plural society, one of multiculturalism, one of different ethnic group interaction of different ethnic groups, along with the many colonial regimes that came to the island. So the indigenous people's story has become one of the new and significant part of the museum narrative. And as I mentioned, we also emphasize it's a museum for everyone. So for example, you can touch the artifacts, or you can hear so you can use different kinds of sensory device or to understand what interests you in the museum. So that's also another part. Which comes to the implementation of more cultural technologies around to enhance the service to different kinds of audiences. And the idea of a plural memory, or a kind of a democratic discourse, is also constitute a major part of our new museum narrative. So for example, for this year, celebrating the 130th anniversary of Taiwan's secession to Japan in 1895. But in the very section of, there was a Taiwan Republic founded in 1895, you can see the different perspective, not only from the Japanese side, or the Chinese side, or the Westerners' viewpoint, but also the local Taiwanese in different sections. So you can think about this very complicated historical juncture through your eyes and also the different sources, visual and we also put a lot of effort on the modern and contemporary history, focus on Taiwan's democratization since 1945. So all the way from the great diaspora of the mainlanders from mainland to Taiwan after 1945, especially 1949, and what happened during the 38 years of martial law period and how the Taiwan's economy took off in the 1960s and become the foreign economy in the 1970s and 80s, and how the lifting of martial law resulted after the wave of different kinds of social movement in the late 1980s, and then what happened after the lifting of martial law, the 3 decades of democratization, the direct presidential election, and 3 different regime changes, and the controversy about national identity, etc. So this become part of the new narrative. And we also focus on contemporary issues, try to solicit more different views, and also become a platform of social dialogue by incorporating ongoing debates like transitional justice, indigenous land rights, and along with other like environmental issues into the museum narrative. And the whole new permanent exhibition concluded with the idea of public history, which emphasized not an authoritative or academic view, or the so-called right view of history, but the idea of shared history, co-writing, negotiation, and continuous dialogue. This kind of idea constitutes the backbone of our museum narrative. So every man is her own historian is become the key idea to underline the function of these museums. So we invite the people to join us to tell their own stories through oral history and other means. And we also have different workshops or history classrooms activities to invite people to talk or discuss or even debate about different kinds of issues that are related to both historic and contemporary Taiwan. So this idea of public history or public history making will continue to leading the curation of exhibition, and also all sorts of museum-related knowledge production activities. And in 2022, I, along with other my colleagues, went to Prague, University, to attend the ICON conference. And during that very conference in 2022, they passed a very important new definition of museums, which has been a 3-year-long debates and discussion since the Kyoto ICON. And there are some new words being added to this new definition of museums, which, in addition, opening up new possibilities and challenges of museums worldwide. And this year, maybe in November, there will be another ICON General Conference in Dubai. So, but this new definition of museums has served as our goal and missions in envisioning the new stage, a new era of this our very museums. So, in addition to catering to the needs of domestic audiences, our museum also work very hard to learn and think about the changing currents of museum thoughts. How can museum play? What's the role of the museum in contemporary society? And what is the role of a history museum in contemporary Taiwan, etc. So this also, this new definition also serves as a major reference in our discussion. So let me just briefly conclude it with some reflection about my 4 years tenure right now in the National Museum of Taiwan History. As a historian by training, I used to work in the academic side of the history knowledge production. And the very institution I've been working for 20 years, the Institute of Taiwan History and Academia Sinica, although it's a relatively new institution, is now growing, become one of the leading institutions in Taiwan historical studies. And it was the idea of this have an institute in the leading academic world, originally in the late 1980s, started from the Taiwan Field Research Service initiated by the late Professor Guangzhi Zhang, KC, in 1980s. And now in 1993, there was a preparatory office. And in 2004, it became a full-fledged institution, along with, for example, there's some graduate institute of Taiwan history or Taiwan culture, Taiwan literature being set up in major university island-wide. So since 2004, it's already 2 decades since this trend of indigenization or Taiwanization took place. Right now, in this very moment, we no longer talk about the necessity or the legitimacy of Taiwan study. We are facing a new challenge of how to produce meaningful, useful, and moving historical stories for our readers, and how to tell the neglected or marginalized stories which has been neglected or marginalized for so many decades or centuries through the development of this island, and how to analyze or theorize the island's the case of Taiwan in comparison to other similar regions that also underwent waves of colonization or immigration, and also facing all sorts of local or transnational, regional, transnational, or even global issues and challenges. So so that is something that I've been trained and been challenges and been working very hard to respond to these kind of issues. But the museum itself provides a new platform or a new vantage point for me to look into these issues together with my colleagues in the museum and also our audiences from home and abroad. So the next challenges, which maybe started from this very year, because we just secured a new budget about $900 to build a new exhibition hall, and also to redesigning and enhancing our service to our audience, international audience. Hopefully, the wrangling, ongoing wrangling in legislative right now will not affect our original schedule, but I think the new stage for this young museum in Taiwan has already begun. In 2021, when I first came, and there's issues that how to proceed. But right now we have a clear picture of how the museum will be in 10 years' time, and how this museum will be, hopefully, will become one of the representative museums and one of the major gateway for international audience to understand Taiwan and from different angles. And just to briefly to conclude, and I hopefully with today's workshop I can also solicit some questions and comments from the floor, and also that will help me and my colleagues to work more efficiently or effectively to facing the new challenge and opportunity for the museum workers in Taiwan. So thank you very much for your attention.
Scott is professor at the School of Sociological and Anthropological Studies at the University of Ottawa. So our second international speaker out of 2 so far this morning. He's written extensively about Taiwan for ethnographies on Taiwan. He's done research there for almost 30 years now. And particularly, he's known for work on indigenous peoples of Taiwan, various indigenous peoples of Taiwan, including the most recent book is called Truly Human, Indigeneity and Indigenous Resurgence on Formosa, which came out just 2 years ago. So Scott, let me turn this over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm happy to get a little taste of spring. That's the bright side of the trip here. This is a wonderful conference, and I want to thank Rob for putting this together. Because it's a real honor to be able to come here and be one of 4 speakers and have the time to actually go through what I've done. This was part of a workshop that was held at the University of Waterloo, and it will be a book chapter which is due on the 31st. So I told Kimi, I said, this is a great chance for me to workshop this and get some feedback. And then I have to cut 3,000 words. I have to get it down from 11,000 to 8,000. So I think the question and answer period will be very helpful for me there. Basically, the topic of it right now is, I changed it for here for Indigenous peoples and states, layers of history in Taiwan's archipelago. But it's in a book about reconciliation and thinking about reconciliation, or kyosei, a Japanese term which some people are thinking about as a way of relations between ethnic groups. And so I'm kind of asking what reconciliation is all about. Rob, you did a good job of introducing me, so I don't have to introduce myself. Basically what I want to do is, this is a dialogue with some historians. I'm an anthropologist. But thinking about reconciliation and symbiosis from the perspective of Taiwan's indigenous peoples. And of course, I'm an anthropologist, so I spend a lot of time in the field, and so I haven't done the kind of historical research that historians are spending the time in the archives. I've been spending time with ordinary people who have no historical training, kind of like Zhang was telling us about public history. And I like that a lot. I think in a way that's kind of what I've done, just by getting experiences that people have. And one of the things that I've noticed about indigenous communities in Taiwan is that there's always some kind of a public awareness, not necessarily given physical form, we'll talk about that, about the historical changes that have happened to them. And I think that really forms the backdrop of my thinking about what is reconciliation, because it's what are we reconciling with? And so, because we'll see that, but there's a real reckoning that goes that is going on in all over the indigenous communities of Taiwan about their relationship with these different layers of history. Now, reconciliation is something that we see when with some of the changes that have happened. So in Australia, the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made an apology to the indigenous peoples, the Aboriginals of Australia, for the lost generation. In Canada, Stephen Harper, Conservative Prime Minister in 2008, made a historical apology for residential schools. And then in Taiwan, President Tsai Ing-wen on August 1st, 2016, one of her first public acts after taking office was to apologize for 400 years of colonization. And basically what was in that museum, right? The time period. So all of that has happened. Also Japan, they recognize that the Ainu are indigenous. All of this has happened within a time in which we take very seriously the demands and the perspectives of indigenous people. But there's still some skepticism about reconciliation, because it's often led by the state. So why is Stephen Harper or even Tsai Ing-wen saying, well, we have to do this reconciliation? And so some scholars like Taiki Alfred, some of the Canadian indigenous scholars are rather skeptical sometimes about recognition and reconciliation. One of the scholars I like to quote very much is John Burroughs, an Anishinaabe legal scholar, said, "Many unwanted nations rested in the bodies of other more powerful nations. These nations did not want to contemplate the smaller group's agency or growth." And I think that these indigenous groups in Taiwan, like elsewhere, they do have some kind of an awareness of being nation is a translation in a way of some of the ways that people think about their own being in the world, and so they are aware that they have a subjectivity, which is not necessarily the same. In fact, it's completely different from Taiwanese subjectivity, and so they have this idea that there is some kind of unity. It's not necessarily easy to map onto those 16 ethnic groups that the government likes to talk about. So I kind of think this is a good way of looking at the constitution of East Asia as a whole, and so that's kind of what this book is about, and to think about the indigenous perspectives of reconciliation and possibilities for symbiosis. I think that this is probably something very well known in this audience, but I think it is important for me to put that in the book, is to really show that what is the indigenous part of Taiwan. And I think it's very interesting to see how these different maps kind of superimposed upon one another are really show a different world in some ways. So, this map here from 1735, I think, is very interesting because it's just white space there where the indigenous people were. They're the ancestors of today's indigenous people. When we look at the missionary map of the island of Formosa by William Campbell, we can see that they were dividing this world that they found in Taiwan based on being, it says here, independent aborigines. So, by this time, in the Qing Dynasty, that was not part of the Qing Dynasty. That's what this map is about. This is where the Han settlers were. And so when Canadian missionary George Leslie Mackay was there, these Aboriginal inhabitants held the island to be theirs by the right of centuries of possession, and when the Chinese came, they were regarded as intruders who would not respect native rights. Very important to what I've learned in the villages, of course, is the Japanese period. In fact, that's what this whole paper is about. And so you have this map here of the Japanese thinking about what they would have to do to get effective administration of the island of Formosa, with the yellow being the Han communities, and then the red being the Seiban, the raw savages, as they've been called since the Qing period. And so that was something there. And if you were, actually, we'll take a look at the next slide, we can see that even in the contemporary maps, that indigenous area is very differently colored than the non-indigenous, especially when we look at maps like this of elections. And so we can see very clearly, this is a really important dynamic, is that the indigenous people tend to vote very much for the KMT. And so no matter which map I had chosen, we would have come up with something like that. And then, the history here of contemporary indigeneity, that Sun Tzu like to talk about indigenous sovereignty, quasi-nation-to-nation relations. It's kind of an empty space here because Mahito didn't talk too much about the indigenous things. He was more into the themes of economic development, which do gain traction in indigenous communities, and then Tsai Ing-wen's reconciliation and her apology. Things have changed. Under Lai Ching-da, there's a new blueprint for indigenous policy, the 5 pillars here of language, health, cultural promotion, indigenous talents, community, sustainable development. There's a change in that really there's not much talk about sovereignty, but this is kind of the political context in which I'm thinking about this. I will skip over the more IR theory stuff, talking about relational approaches in international relations, but it is just important to say that there's a relationality in bringing in a relation with the indigenous peoples. And what's interesting is that when they talk about reconciliation, it's not necessarily the kind of reconciliation the governments talk about in the sense of having a new relation with the state and the indigenous people, and that's something I'll bring up as I look at it. So basically, what I've been doing is I've been spending most of the past nearly 30 years doing work in Taiwan, and over 20 years doing work with indigenous communities, and so this kind of looks at that. I look at the emergent history of Taiwan. I think the palimpsest metaphor is very apt because we're looking, like you've got like a manuscript where you got rid of some things and other things on it. And we can see that here at places like the Elongbi Lighthouse, very down on the southern tip of Taiwan. A fascinating place to look at when you look at how history is presented, is given concrete form in these the explanatory plaques that are telling people what this lighthouse represents. So it's quite interesting to see. For example, inside there is an English sign which says the reason for construction. In 1867, an American ship, the Rover, was wrecked near, I can't read the pinyin when it's here, but Zixing Reef in a storm when sailing from Shantou to Niaojiang. All crew climbed ashore, and all except one were killed by tribal people. About the same time, several Japanese fishing boats were wrecked near that coast. Then the Qing government started the construction of a lighthouse upon the requests of American and Japanese governments. Moreover, the construction of the lighthouse was begun in 1875 and completed in 1883. The Qing government sent troops to prevent tribesmen from attacking the construction site. In order to prevent attacks from tribal people, the lighthouse was built like a castle. And there's the bilingual sign outdoors here is very curious, referring to many shipwreck accidents since 1867. It's much more detailed in Chinese and English. And curiously, the reason for making a fortified lighthouse is different there. It says that the reason is to prevent foreigners from colluding with Aborigines. And so it's equipped with moats, cannons, surrounding wall. Soldiers were sent to guard it, making one of the most fortified lighthouses in the world. And then it talks about how it was heavily bombed during World War II, mentioning only in Chinese that it was bombed by the Allies, rebuilt after the restoration of Taiwan. And so I would love to know the history of that, because there's a certain nationalist rhetoric and all the different signs. I'd like to know which one came first, and don't have that information. It is interesting to see that they see that there's a threat of the tribespeople, or even some collusion with foreigners. Interestingly, the peoples are never named. So we don't see that those are the Paiwan people. We don't see that, they didn't use that name in 1867, but we don't know that the people who attacked the Rover were called the Koaluts, led by Chief Tokedok, who ruled over 19 so-called tribes. I think that now, because of the television show Segadu Formosa, 1867, that there's a lot more awareness of that history. But this is kind of a built artifact that people do see, and it brings up an important part of the history is that there were these groups of people who had not come under Qing domination. They posed some threats to the new emergent maritime system that was coming up with trade, and so it's interesting to see. So I did some time in some of these communities, and of course the Rover incident and the Mudan incident are very important. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this was the turning point in Taiwanese history that made it into the Taiwan that we know. But in March 12th, 1867, there was the wreck of the American merchant ship Rover. 14 sailors were killed by Paiwan people. The Qing refused to take responsibility. So the Americans did set a punitive expedition with a French-born diplomat for the Americans called Charles Legendre. He made an agreement with Chief Dokidok that the shipwrecked crews would be protected. The Taiwan people today are very proud of having signed a nation-to-nation treaty with the United States. That's their understanding and proof that they were recognized as a nation in the 19th century. For Legendre, when you read his book, we can see that for him it was proof that half of the island was never under Qing jurisdiction. And so there were legal arguments at the time about that. The Qing dynasty then encountered a second incident with a trading vessel from the Miyako Islands of Ryoko, which was shipwrecked. 54 people were killed. Again, the Qing said it was outside of their jurisdiction. Legendre got involved again. So he was an advisor for the Japanese. They sent in their punitive expedition. When we read the details of it, it was spending a lot of time waiting in their tents and getting malaria and being very sick. But there was a battle at Stonegate Shiman. And so finally then the Qing decided that they better pay up or they will lose the island to Japan. So they paid indemnities, they claimed jurisdiction over all of Formosa. And what's interesting is that Japan was representing these Miyako sailors, and so this was really a turning point when the Qing said, okay, now all of this island is ours. It's also the turning point when Japan was able to say Okinawa is ours. And so it was a big change then. So interestingly, the Qing never did succeed in getting control of the indigenous areas. So by 1895, the Japanese had to conquer it militarily. They realized that it really did not fall into the Treaty of Shimonoseki. It took them until 1914 to conquer all of them. And so that's kind of the historical background to that. What I find interesting as an anthropologist, however, is the way that plays out in the field. And so in this part of Taiwan, this is very important. So in the year 2014, on May 25th, there was an academic conference on the 140th anniversary of the Mudan incident. The Mudan Township officials opened the Mudan Incident Memorial Park. They unveiled a new statue marking love and peace. And it was special because they actually had this as part of a project of reconciliation, not with the government in Taipei, they weren't interested in that, but with Okinawa. And so they reached out to Okinawa, and there was a delegation from Okinawa, and the same statue was placed in two copies of it, one in Taiwan and one on Miyako Island. And they explained, it was the people of Couscous who did this, that the word hejia, or reconciliation, in their language is matatoguk. And the root means to carry something on one's head, so to carry responsibility. And so they felt a responsibility to create this peaceful and new relationship with Ryokyo. And so I was there, but I wanted to show the collective grave that they've made for those sailors from Okinawa. And then I was able to also attend in 2020 this event here in Shiman, which is where the main battle took place. And they called it Savalitan, which means which is a way of talking about reconciliation, but it was really from their perspective that this word can mean ancestor or ancestral spirit, but it can also mean a transition from one state to another. And so they want to get to that state of having a strong identity themselves, but being able to reconcile with a new relationship. And so they were promoting some kind of a sovereignty. It was interesting that their ritual was happening at the same time as the commemoration in the township office. And so there was kind of a political thing going on there. Very interesting is the town where the incident happened against the Okinawa sailors. Gawashi is what it's called now. Is that they've actually established this Shinto shrine, as a way of showing that relationship with Japan. Very interesting and many different ways to unpack that because it's not very Okinawan either. But it is something that they have done there. So that's one of the historical incidents, and I think there are many lessons we could draw from that. But one of them is that for the Taiwan people, that what happened there was really a transition period. It brought them into a new way of understanding the world with international treaties and so forth, and so it was a very violent introduction to modernity. And they have all of these public ways with concrete monuments of commemorating and keeping that memory alive. That can be contrasted to what I saw on Orchid Island. And on Orchid Island, the incident would be called the American Ship Incident, which was the 1903, the Benjamin Sewell, which there's no monument to that. But people eventually, by living there long enough, people told me about that. So basically in 1903, so we're already in the Japanese period. The Japanese had no presence there. They had shown up and set up a police office. There was one or two people there. There was nothing. People's lives had not changed. But again, there was a ship. It was they passed LOB, and they apparently didn't recognize not know how to read the signs that there was a typhoon coming, and so they ended up in a typhoon. One lifeboat returned to Taiwan, but one with 12 people on board landed on Orchid Island, which at that time already had a reputation for being a very dangerous place for ships. Police records show that 7 people were killed, 2 were enslaved, and in total 5 people survived. Frankly, the records that I was able to look at in some of the literature is very convincing because of the detail, and so it shows that there were so many Japanese and so many Filipinos and so forth on the boat. It was not just Americans. One African American was on the boat, and so it was very different than the story that somebody told me. Some people there told me that the Tao had killed them, and so they kind of believed the story that was the official one. But the guy I lived with, actually, Shabo Namoran, the pastor of Dong, he told me a very different story, and he has actually a book about it. One person took me up here to actually look down at where it happened, and he had said that people were killed. Shabun Lamaran insists that the Tao were intrinsically peaceful and they wouldn't have killed anybody. He tells a story about how the others drowned, and the weather was so bad they couldn't go and try to save them, or they would have. But one person was swept ashore, and so he kind of describes this physically fit, blonde American boy who was confused, and they was unconscious, and he came to, and they fed him and gave him to the police. But it's interesting because there are stories about it that they people tell. There's a little bit of a reluctance, so I never asked anybody. I'd waited till people told me about it on their own. But there was an agreement that the Japanese intervened. There was an agreement that this was the turning point when they lost their sovereignty. So when they really became incorporated into the Japanese empire. What's interesting, though, is that they say, we don't want to talk about this. So there's silence around it. There is nothing like the public commemorations that we saw in Mudan and like we're going to see in Wusha. But nonetheless, what's important to them is that somehow they see that there was this conflict with the West at one point, and then they have had reconciliation because everybody's Christian now. And so there's that kind of reconciliation, and they say, well, let's just not talk about that. It was in the past, we'll think about the future. And I actually think that that's very much a Tao way of living in the world, because if you look at, like, for example, their naming system, their traditional naming system is people don't have their own names. They take the name of their child. And then when their child gets married and has a child, they change their name and they take the name of their grandchild. And so Shabun means grandparent, and so he's the grandfather of Lamuran. And his son will call himself Shama Mamuran. The girl's mother is Shina Mamuran. So everybody's named after the children. So we're always looking into the future. And so I think there's a very important, foundation in Tao way of living in the world of ontology. Look in the future. Don't dwell on the past. So that kind of fits in. This one is very well known. So as I'm coming to the end of the time, I think we can kind of go through the Musha incident of October 27th, 1930, a bit more quickly. This is actually the community where I've spent most of my career working on, was with Sedek and Turugu people that are related. And I speak mostly here about Musha, but the Turugu and the Sedek are part of those 16 officially recognized groups. They are, in fact, very closely related. There are 3 dialect groups in both of them. But up in Nantou, on both sides of it, they got concrete markers of their incidents. I have limited space, so I didn't talk about the Turugu incident of 1914, but I wanted to talk about the 1931. And this is what happened when Musha became the model Japanese colony. And so by 1930, it was already 35 years into Japanese rule. In the first 10 years or so, they gradually made their way through Nantou. There's a place called Renziguan, the pass where people stopped because it was dangerous to go into the Sedek territory then. But they gradually got one community after another to agree to follow the Japanese. They say that they did not give up their sovereignty. They just agreed to follow the Japanese like you would follow a master hunter in the forest. It was to go along with them. But one by one, they got them to agree to be ruled by Japan. They got Hehuanshan. They then went from there. They named it Hehuanshan because as a celebration for taking over. And then they attacked Durugu from there. But then Musha became this kind of a model colony. And by 1930, they felt so secure that they were actually bringing in tourists to look at it. There was a trading post, and it was considered one of the most beautiful tourist sites in Taiwan. Paul Barkley says this was a real provocation, considering the violent way in which Japan had taken over this territory, to then bring in these tourists and expect to be served. But what happened then is that in 1930, finally, after all of these ceremonies and these violence against them, there were some events that happened, more personal events. But on October 27th, 1930, there was an uprising. You might have seen the film Warriors of the Rainbow, Sedek Badai, a very, very violent film, which is more about that uprising. Interestingly, the people who live there, they have got a memorial hall there, and they refer to 2 Musha incidents. Neither one of them is the uprising on the 27th. The first one is the Japanese punitive expedition against them. There were 6 groups that were involved in that uprising. And so at the Gluban Survivors Hall, they have the statistics there. The second incident happened a year later when the survivors of the first one were put into a detention camp, and then the Japanese brought the Doda people to attack them, and they were unarmed. So we can see that their population really declined. So with originally a population of 1,236 dwindled down to 296 after the second Musha incident. So this really is a serious crime against humanity here. And so what's interesting, though, in terms of reconciliation, so we've got these three ethnic groups, the Doda, Dikadaya, and Turugu, and then what happens there is that the Doda, the ones who carried out the second Musha incident, keep insisting on having these ceremonies of reconciliation. And so it's these three cases. We got the first one where they want to remember things and have reconciliation with Japan. And then the second case where they don't really talk about it, but the reconciliation happened with the West because of the church. And then this third case, reconciliation is within a newly established ethnic group, which there were no such thing in the past, where so many people would be part of an indigenous people. That's kind of a brand new way of looking at the world. And so very different ways of thinking through reconciliation, and none of it has to do with the reconciliation that Tsai Ing-wen talked about. So I think that as we're getting to the end here, just thinking about what this means is that there might be 16 state-recognized peoples there, but in daily life their identity is much more complex. They all have these memories of being dragged into the nation-state system against their will. They have different identities. We can talk about that. But the fact that they were there and that they were not under the control of the Qing until the Japanese came, it kind of disproves any idea that Taiwan was always part of China. I think that what's probably the most important part of this is that it happened in the Japanese period when they were really incorporated into a state and in a very special way. Paul Barclay calls that bifurcated sovereignty. The ROC has attempted to integrate them into society in different ways through democracy. There's still a strong sense of difference. I would call that bifurcated citizenship. And it seems as if there are some serious problems still going on. And so reconciliation is important. It's difficult because of the tense relations that exist between the indigenous and non-indigenous. I think that symbiosis, kyosei, is something that some of the Japanese scholars have brought up. I want to develop that later. There won't be time even in this 8,000-word essay. But there is something happening there. The indigenous people are important to contemporary geopolitics, and I had to take that part out of my paper, but they still are very important. They're very active in the military. They have half the population, half of the territory of the island. Of course, with Orchid Island, they also have a very key strategic part in the Bashi Channel. But there is a tense relationship that they have with the DPP. Maybe in question and answer we can talk about that if people are interested. The PRC does have their influence. And so I kind of concluded my talk by thinking about this space here. Fu Kunshi from Hualien, who when he was magistrate of Hualien did get a lot of indigenous support. Now I can say with very much conviction that none of the indigenous people I know voted for him this time because he was not one of the indigenous legislators. But he is now the party whip for the KMT and very close to China. So we have some interesting things to look at moving